My wife always says, don't let them read that CV, tell them the truth. And then I said, what is it? And she said, don't tell them that you lost your virginity in an Anglia in the Panorama Drive-In in 1970. Don't tell them that you're 10 k's overweight still. Don't tell them that you actually ruined me, that I was a single parent with a husband, but you were not here. And don't tell them that what you're about to say is really other people's opinions and insights. So stop the lie. But there is a truth about the subject this morning, and I'm so privileged to share this with you and to invite you along on the journey. I've given you a roadmap instead of a PowerPoint so that you can follow and scribble and find your particular place on this journey as you reflect on your own talent, your own capacity, your own potential, review your own achievement motive, look at your substance used and that abused. And you may well ask, well, how does a subject of this nature find itself onto the agenda of a conference of this design? And I just want to salute those who put the program together to have allowed this particular aspect on the program, which is purely philosophical, and if you wish, even syrupy. But let me authenticate myself in the topic, ladies and gentlemen. I've spent my life working with executives, and I've seen just over 38,000 of them in counseling and coaching and therapy. And these are the people who continue to inform me. I don't know much. They tell me what it's about. My business is to conduit out of that authentic source the information that matters and to convert it into some form of a message. So I've appointed that critical mass of people who appoint me to actually address you this morning. I might just give you one or two pointers to also vindicate this particular topic as we start out. I recently did very exhaustive research by virtue of one question. I asked executives, are you happily married? And they had to give me one answer, yes or no. Not, we're going through a dip, or it was better, or I've got a bit of extraordinary interest. Whatever it is, are you happily married? And 13% of people said unconditionally yes. And then I asked the second question. And I did this with about 100 people, roughly. And I said, how many of you last night had dinner with your family? How many of you had the privilege not only of kissing your children goodnight, but just spending 10 minutes with each one individually, having an emotional intercourse, reviewing the day? How many, in fact, had a romantic time with your sweetheart? And then the second part of the question, how much time did you spend on your iPad last night at home? And I needn't give you that statistic. The point is just this, that if we're talking about talent development, it is such an easy exogenous task. We can stimulate cognitive capacity. We can certainly get into the talent territory and discover substance and abilities. We can use assessment techniques and psychometrics. We can use the science to measure the achievement motive in people. We can measure deductive reasoning and analytical ability and mental alertness and all of those. But what people are skilled at is to disguise their sense of unhappiness, and to do that very astutely, and yet being exceedingly successful. I asked the same audience as we left and we had coffee and something stronger. Just answer this as you drive home. What on earth are you doing? And secondly, what are you doing on earth? And it was fascinating to meet with such people later. Finally, as the introduction, once a year I invite 12 of my buddies to meet with me, and we call the day nix. We do nothing. Now that's an oxymoron. You can't do nothing. But we get together for a day, and whatever our emotions are, we'll assume a particular direction. And inevitably, every time, and they're people of my ilk, the discussion is about quality of life, work-life balance, whatever the term is that you prefer. We talk about the essence of being, your ontology, wat doen jy? And then we listen to some music and we're pathetic and we cry and we hug and we say goodbye and we go home. And then I ask people to write me one single sentence, ideally one word, as the minutes of our chat. And in October last year, the dominant sensation that people wrote back, and these are first team players, if I mentioned their names you would know them all, they all said to me, I have not loved enough and I spent my emotions on commercial issues. In fact, one of them said, an orthopedic surgeon, I don't know whether it's a function of medicine, he said, I didn't kiss enough throughout my life. I was just happy he didn't start that at the conference. So in order not to irritate you with a lot of theory and latest research and books or whatever, can I teach you psychology up to master's level quickly? It takes about 10 minutes. We expanded a bit at Varsity for the fees. But would you care to go in your pamphlet, and I trust you all have a copy with you, just to go to the human life cycle? And obviously I will expound as we progress. What's this all about? It is our journey. It is about one's age, stage, and phase. I'm 68 years old, and it was interesting when I saw that we're projecting out to 2030. In 15 years' time, I'll be 83. And as my son said at my birthday last week, thank God that ugly isn't painful. But 83 in 15 years' time. But right now, this is where I am. This is my designated time. This is my moment. I'm here now. I happen now. And whatever the criteria are or the vicissitudes that surround me, those are the issues that shape me, that unleash talent and aspirations and ambition. But I'm on this journey, and whatever our life expectancy is, and in this country for executives it's roughly 76, it does mean, if that were true, that I've got 7 years left to live. And I want to cram life into that time, and in particular, engage the unfinished stuff. I think it's wise to get real and to remind oneself it's about time. Let me take you through this quickly, and I think it'll amplify the message. I trust so. At the age of 0, it's a symbiotic phase. And we're never 0 years old. We're 9 months old when we're born, and that's significant. You lived in 38 degrees C and you got a balanced diet for 9 months. And at a certain point, you've got to get out of there, and then they pluck you out. And they cut your cord and they spank your bum and they say, get a life. And let's stop just there. I've been challenged and continue to be challenged by modern young people, and they're wonderful. And they ask me, what is this world all about? How does one assume a balanced, integrated lifestyle, as if I know? And 25 years ago, ladies and gentlemen, when this new integrated, dualistic lifestyle popped so almost violently into our lifestyles, I was challenged by patients and others to give a perspective on what it's about. What is the implication of dualism? And of course, I knew nothing because I grew up differently. I'm from Afrikaner heritage. Women were not allowed to work. So I knew nothing and I had no authentication. But I read a book and I phoned a friend and I traveled to a country and I tried to find out, and I knew nothing. But nevertheless, I had to offer people something. And I remind you, we're at phase 1. But I did consult a wise man eventually, who was my father-in-law. But as you know, you don't consult family, they doff. But I thought, let me ask him. He's both a medical doctor and a child psychologist. He should know something. And I'll never forget, he took his pen from his pocket and he held it up. And he said to me, you know, my boy, before a child can internalize the association of sound with the object, because a word is just a standardized sound, it's pen every time, or mommy, or boti, or teddy. Before a child can do that independently and functionally, that child should have heard that sound at least 700 times from the same source. And the wise man said, I think it's sad if the primary source is absent. One of the greatest challenges to modern people is not modern lifestyles and families, but school holidays. What do you do with that infrastructure? Where do you find the logistic to integrate this world? And we talk so glibly about a work-life integration. Up to the age of 3 is the formative phase. And that's where we get our normative construct. Values, norms, principles, standards, ideology, religion, and faith. That's what you get at home. And you have no immunity. Our parents clothed us with koöperasie klere. We looked like the proletariat in khaki. Terrible. You know, other people's taste actually inflict a blemish on you when you're that innocent. It happens, and it happened with us. But that's what they give you. They make you grow up in this kind of faith and that religion and this culture and this color, and they disallow you to listen to the hit parade because it's sin at Sunday night. But that's what you got. That was your milieu. Up to the age of 6 is the instructional phase. And as you'll notice there, that's where we get manners and culture and our formative input. And that's where we say, don't do that. And we say, pick it up. And we say, close your mouth when you eat, and you do it well if the unity is functional. Up to the age of 9 is the prescriptive phase, and this is where we shape people for independence and for coping with their environment. And this is where you will allow little Sarah to sleep with a friend on a Friday night, not because she's okay, but because you're okay with her being okay. And you'll only know that if you've inculcated that self-management, that self-regulation, if you're good enough by being available enough. Up to the age of 12 is the phase of puberty. That's where the revolution starts, and there's an acceleration of maturation in all respects, physiologically. Incidentally, don't you find it sad that young little girls are getting boobs at 8 in this world? The acceleration of all of this, whether it's visual stimulation or the food we eat, is not important, but imagine if you miss your youth and you were never young. How do we actually not retard development and restrict talent development, but how do we actually embrace people so that they can remain within their authentic age and stage and phase? But during that puberty phase, you get hair in interesting places. It's a time of loneliness. Before that, life was natural and easy. In my own home, it was wonderful. We swam in the nude as a family, and we tickled one another and did funny things that were just so easy. My sons played with my wife's boobs, and I was jealous. And my daughters pulled my penis, well, not that long, and we giggled, and it was funny, and it was natural. And one morning, your daughter steps from the shower, and she shrieks, and she wraps a towel and dashes into her room and bangs the door. And the brother says, "Nog a tantrum," and my wife says, "No, it shows." And then as a family, you can go to Clicks and buy the little Alettes together and celebrate life. Or perhaps you don't. And then it's missed forever. Up to the age of 15 is all about identity. That's where we want to not only announce ourselves, but flaunt our uniqueness, and the boys in particular. Have you noticed how they drop their crotch of the brooks, and the underpants must show? And have you noticed they can't walk when they're roughly 14? They like stalk, they have a sway. They're suspect, they're phantoms. And if you don't know their world, you miss it. I remind myself of my daughter at roughly that age who called me in and said, "Dad, let me help you, let me liberate you." And I said, "I get help nodig." And I said, "What is it?" She said, "As from today, you need never again like my music." And I said, "Thank heaven." And I said, "But what's the trick here?" She said, "It's simple. Please just know the music I like." Have you found that proximity is also a source of education? But you've just got to move into that space. And that territorial imperative will advise you. So if we develop talent and call it human capital, what a word, incidentally. It's based on knowledge. It's based on nurturing. It's based on shaping it, positioning it so that it doesn't get hurt. It's precious stuff, you know. And let me interrupt myself also. If our motive with talent development, or as it used to be, training and development, expanding capacity, etc., be careful that the fundamental motive is not only for the dividend to the shareholder, but actually for the enrichment of the individual. Up to the age of 18, it's all about choices. We choose things in life, but choices also find us. We get bursaries because we got straight A's in matric, and that's okay. And we accelerate our growth as a consequence of these choices. And we say we're going to do medicine, or we become chartered accountants, or we're going to take a gap year forever like certain wealthy children. That's okay. But is it you? That same orthopedic surgeon I alluded to earlier on said to me in an encounter recently, when he was sad, he literally dashed into my rooms and just laid down on the couch, and I said, "What's fout, Swara?" He said, "A lot." I said, "Share it, spill it." And he said, "I've just made an incredible discovery." And obviously I inquired, "What is it?" And he said to me, "I have just discovered that I've never been me. I've only been my qualifications." And then we explore who he truly is, the authentic he. And then he reveals it and he says, "This is who I am. I want to propagate," as he pushed it and announced it, "shade." I said, "What's that?" He said, "Well, bome plant. I want to plant trees." And then he buys a farm in Leidenburg and he plants trees and he cuts down timber. But there was one interesting advantage he did have, and that is he could afford his freedom. Imagine if your talent and your qualification actually becomes your incarceration. You've never been you. Up to the age of 21 is the adolescent phase. That's when you're a little big and plenty small and in the way. You can't believe your mother married your father. I mean, the epitome of bad choice. The neighbors, the dogs, the cars, the family, I mean, it's all just a collaboration of doofness. You can't believe it happened to you. And the only unique person is yourself. And as you will recall from your own life and even from your children, it lasts about 9 months, and it's severely replaced by a sense of family. And people embrace and reconnect, and you find your position in it and you cherish it. And it's important that you have it. But adolescence is that accelerated maturity, but not with a very strong foundation yet. Up to the age of 24 is all about relationships, and it's what you have in stock. That's when you'll dine out with somebody you like, but you've proved it. You'll go on a Contiki tour with somebody that you know will not distort 14 days in Europe. My wife made a statement not so long ago, and I thought that she was either very funny or rude, until I truly understood the depth of it. She said to me, "You know, you can only marry somebody you've met." Imagine you lived in a life of apartness, of deprivation, of restriction, and you never connected with who you should have. Imagine not having a life that is expansive, exploratory, where a world of declarative noises becomes your din, where you can select from it and go there and say, "This is it, the buffet of life." What do we owe the youth? Just to explore their talent, their capacity, or do we actually need to work with their expansive selves and to fill the capacities and the voids in their lives that otherwise would have constituted their deprivation? Up to the age of 30 is the vocational phase that ends, the first decade of our formal or institutional life. That's where we make our impression, where the system takes cognizance of ourselves, where our abilities become public, where we hear the corporate applause and we get addicted to it. And we bring ourselves there and our BScs and our PhDs or whatever, and we deposit that into the system, and the system embraces it, and that's wonderful. But if you're immature, have you noticed that you become addicted to attention, and you very often refute the very substance of who you ought to be? Who will nurture you? Is it a mentor? Is it a coach? Is it a counselor? What is it? The most useful thing that I found at that age was a constructive conscience, but somebody that reminded me of it. Up to the age of 3 is the accelerative phase of our lives. This is the time, ladies and gentlemen, during which we really take off. We generate a lot of revs, and we go hell for leather, and it's fantastic. Why? Because we're good, we run on a high octane, and the system actually feeds it. But this is also the first time of disconnect, when we actually remove ourselves from the essence of our being, that huge word, the ontology, and where the rewards, both tangible and otherwise, actually become the agenda, the roadmap, and the question that is asked subsequently, retrospectively, where was it going? What was I chasing? And let me just say this, that as much as we're propagating here a deeper philosophical, or if you wish, a normative construct about work-life integration, my children said to me one day when I was home for a minute, Dad, we don't want your stuff, we want you. And I felt guilty and bought them a holiday home. And then I realized that what they want is my stuff and me. They want Lani Tekkies, they want the Seychelles, they want a convertible for their mother because it scores point at the matrix farewell. That is part of the balanced integrated lifestyle, incidentally. It's not just copping out and buying the trout farm in Dullstroom. That's a lie. It is the all-in, but the balance. But when do you get it at 33? Up to 36 is the phase of maturation, and you look at the indicators there. But this is where we start to consolidate success, because it's often too much too soon for too few. It's all about us. It is us in action and traction, and where the world actually dines out on our talents. And it's fantastic for both us and the recipient thereof. But you know, we don't calculate the phantom damage during that phase. And part of our world, I would suggest, as people assembled in this auditorium, is also to detect where that goes wrong. And in that process, ladies and gentlemen, if we only work with individual talent and don't spare a thought for the corporate soul, then we might just contribute towards a toxic organization. 39 is an era of neglect. And you might say, why, and why is it such an absolute figure? One generation ago, the sounds of so-called mid-career stuff, not crises, but happened in the late 40s and early 50s. You'll remember that, midlife. I'm hearing those same sounds, those conventional utterances now in the late 30s amongst talented people. And the retorts that I get are things like, what's it all about? Do I want to work this way? Do I really want to negotiate Grayston Avenue for the rest of my life at 7:30? Do I want to compromise my holidays again? Am I prepared to miss my daughter's ballet classes and performance again and again? Am I prepared to cancel leave in the interest of the project? Is my talent so universal that it actually denies me choice? Up to 42 is the restrictive phase, and again the indicators are obvious. But it's interesting how many modern people I see, and I gladly and in a very rewarding sense also, people are saying, my children are about to leave home, it happens now, and I have one chance once to be an optimal parent, and I'm almost fluffing it. And this is the end of your first semester of your life. This is when we have our children, when we make our mark, when we do the MBA, when we overseas on the conference, and when our children grow through puberty and adolescence, and we're not there. We can purchase it in. We can outsource the maturation of our children easily. People of wealth sit in this room. We can afford it. But you can never outsource your fundamental responsibility. Or as my wife says, you can't kiss on Skype. Up to 45 is the era of materialism. There's a quest within modern people to accumulate wealth in order to provide for whatever the future is and to get rid of debt. It's interesting. And then people do this and save for another day and put a lot of money away and invest and do all those funny things. It's interesting that we provide so handsomely for when we're old, decrepit, and dead, and we forget to live now. So if I have 100 rands left, I'll rather go to a theater and cherish the music and share it with friends than give it to the bank at 6.5%. Forget it. I'll invest in life and postpone death for another day. But it does help if you don't have debt. there is a realism in there as well. Late 40s, it's about values clarification. And there are essentially 4 factors that consume our mental and physical energy, dear friends. And those are the self, your partner, your family, and your work. And we've done this research since 1988 by just asking people, what are the imperatives that shape you? And the same 4 factors appear every time. Right at the top, as the ideal, as the epistemology of your logic, dit wat jy moet weet, is that you have to love others as you love yourself. So caring starts here, get it right. So self-management is done by the self. And when you want to expand yourself, you say to somebody else, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death us do part nogal, kom sussie. That's serious language. And out of that come children. And work is an arbitrary activity, whether you work here or there, it's a matter of choice. But modern successful people, the talented people of our time, reverse the sequence. The world of work is sublimated at the expense of the self. And what we then do is we, in fact, inflict a feudal culture here, where I become the slave of my own potential. At 50, it's about posture. We've been at work for 3 decades, 30 years. We look the part, and the system knows. They make us EXCO members and chairpersons of companies and CEOs. Fantastic. But I might just remind you that in this country, and probably in most others, if not more, at the age of 50, the typical South African executive will have worked 10 years overtime for free. You have 10 years in the bank that you've given away voluntarily. And then you leave the work one afternoon at 3:30 and they say, "Ek werk halfdag, né?" And the organization is overdrawn on you. But then we also blame the system, that damn company I work for, as if the company is the villain. Talent is dangerous if not harnessed. Talent will actually assume a persona that will destroy self-control in the same talented people. Who will tell you that? Who will tell you as a CEO, cool it? Is this not your son's birthday? What are you doing here? And let me cite my friend Brant Pretorius when we still worked at Toyota, and we did a thing, and we went away and we spoke this language. And when we finished on the Sunday afternoon, he got up and he said, "Let me make a unilateral declaration of moral intent." And I thought, don't do this. But he nevertheless got up and he said, "Firstly, let me beg your pardon for arranging this over a weekend. It's family time. We will never do it again. Secondly, as from today, there's no liquor on the premises. You know, we shouldn't drink and drive. We're in vehicles." Thirdly, he said, nobody's allowed at work before 7:30. Get here better. And nobody is allowed to be here after 5:30. Go home better. You'll come back here better tomorrow morning. And they are still the top company in the country. At 54, up to 54, we alienate from the imperatives that actually matter. Why? Because the compounded energy is now at work. And the expectation obviously compounds. Why? Because of our legacy. We get things done. We're good. We're not arrogant. We're blessed. That's what we are. But the system likes it. We fill 5 positions, and we do it exceedingly well. But we also say it's not long now. I'm going to take retirement at 58 or 60 or whatever. I can afford it. I'm out of here just now. And you know how many people trash a scintillating career in the final months of their lives because they just went too far. They were never able to define what is actually enough. And yet people want to consolidate at the age of roughly 57, get control of this world. In other words, harness that talent that we possess in a way that we can free up, discover our liberties and our liberation in a way that it actually is fulfilling, and not do the bucket list when you're decrepit and you're about to die. Ask Jack Nicholson, he'll tell you. Yes, at 60 there is this notion, this threshold of so-called obsolescence, where you should be finishing up now, move on. Not go to the second league, but actually just disappear. In America, the retirement age now is 71, as you know. Firstly, the pension funds are bankrupt, but other than that, people are able, and they work longer, and they want to pay off the debt which they incurred since 2006, etc. But the simple question I ask of myself as I share it with you this morning, talented people and your audience out there, is this: when are you going to start to live? When are you going to actually address the issue of get a life, but getting it is your clutch? Are you living or are you being lived? The Afrikaans is beautiful. Wat maak jy met die lewe? Beleef jy of oorleef jy? And oorleef is panic, and panic is neurosis, and neurosis is Prozac. Yes, we're tired in the early 60s, even though we might masquerade a fitness, etc., but we've worked very hard. And the majority of all of us in this audience will have done 2 careers at roughly 60 because of the way we are and where we come from. Never forget, we kept the majority of this population away from the world of thinking. And we had to do it ostensibly. And we're busy nurturing, finding, shaping a new world. And we're part of it. We're the transient people. We've got to get it right, and by goodness we are. The morality of that is just so evident as we continue to exert ourselves and our resources. Things end at 66. Not only careers, etc., but also ourselves start to assume decay. With men, I find, particularly ladies, that they want to revisit their youth in a very pathetic way. Have you noticed how these men revisit their youth symbolically? You will notice many of them actually show more cleavage than women. They drop buttons here. They buy funny motor cars. They trade in wonderful women who raised these children on a little bit of fluff. And I always say to them, a prostate only goes so far, but you moet maar net jou tyd ken. But they do it, and I'm isolating the men at my own expense. But things terminate, and that age and stage and phase should ideally be one of a reflection on having got it right. And although one has regrets about messing up because you're immature, etc., it is useful if you know that the damage was not that severe, and in particular that it's not evident in your children. People are lonely at roughly 70, and you know why. Their children are here now and busier than their parents. You don't see them. They give you scraps of time and attention because they're so good. Why? Because they emulate this fabulous image they had. And yet we're free to do what we wish in the early 70s. We can actually embrace the things that we didn't do. And the tragedy is that most people in that phase do nothing. They sit because they are apprentices at using freedom. The greatest single fear that successful people have at that age, and when they sit with me, and I see at least 12 of them at any one time, couples, is that they have nothing to say to one another. They fear attention. They will always go on holiday with other people. Their own domestic environment is one of uncomfortable silence. In the mid-70s, people want to become existentialistic. They want to chat about what next. Where is this going? Where is this life thing actually going? Is there an afterlife, whatever it is? I'm not a theologian, but people talk to us about it. And whatever their take is on that particular encounter, they align with that, and then they're at peace, and then they're old, then you're geriatric. I invite you to do 2 things on your little checklist. Firstly, go to where your actual age is. Let's say you're 45, go there. And now retrospectively, walk back through every preceding phase and ask this question in every phase. What is my unfinished business that's inhibiting the true blossoming of both my physical and moral talent? Wat is my ongedane besigheid? What are the things that are pulling up my existential handbrake? And the second challenge I leave with you is this. As you now look forward, can whatever preceded that point at 45 continue? Or should I actually shape that declination severely by changing it dramatically? You might think you're on track, but you're not. As an aviator, we all know you aim there, you set the equipment to go there. But it's useful to know there's a crosswind, because if you're going to aim there and end there, it's good to budget for a few more minutes and take more fuel on board in order to hit the target. I've brought you on your list the key indicators of unwellness and what is causing this particular dilemma in the modern world. And I'm not out of it myself. But I do a factor analysis, and I've left it for you, and obviously I'm not going to irritate you by running through that. But at the risk of being arrogant, I would suggest to you, if you have that courage, why don't you run through that list with whoever is closest to you and do that audit of the talent embedded in your relationship and perhaps the neglect or the abuse thereof. But before you do it, just budget for a hell of a scrap, because I promise you this is an agenda for a fight. But go there and try and eke out the KPIs that matter in there, and then see whether you've got the energy to fix it. I'll just isolate two critical aspects that cause our demise. Firstly and foremost, if you don't get ego and power and wealth in position, don't even start. In other words, what is enough? Define that, and you're on a good foothold. Secondly, allow your adversity to educate you. Because, have you noticed that success doesn't give a lot of insight, but adversity does? But revisit what you should have learned or busy learning from adversity and convert that into a strategy. It actually works. Finally, I've seen a little movie about just 35 times. It's called Flashdance. Have you seen it? If not, here's the little vignette that touches me every time as I wrap our chat. Here's a lady who's got all the talent in the world. She's a modern dancer, but after 8 in the evening. During the day, she's a welder in a factory in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. She doesn't look the part. She wears dungarees, she's got a greased tash, cracked fingernails, 9 o'clock tonight, the best. But she walks home one evening and her ears take her feet into the academy, and she's amongst classical music and ballerinas, and she witnesses pirouette and arabesque. And the comparison hits her, the haves and the have-not, but forgetting the other have. And dashes home, and her boyfriend witnesses their anguish and detects what happens, and she recounts exactly what's happened, and I won't do that again. But he asks her, what are you going to do about this comparison, this ambivalence in your life, balance, being successful but not at a price? And she says, I'm going to stop dancing because I saw the other world and I can't be it. And he says, that's fine. If you want to actually trade in what you're so good at, that's your choice. But just remember, if you lose your dream, you die. And a career and life, as syrupy as it may sound, is not a nightmare. It's a matter of choice, positioning ourselves in the context and in the countenance of the stuff that actually frowns upon us in a decent way and doesn't detract from whatever matters. And if then this community is embedded in the development of people, discovering talent and deploying it into the world of work, spare a thought, not only for what is right and relevant and that will add value, but spare a moral thought for what will make people happy. Thank you.